I'll introduce Anna first. Anna, I first came across Anna's work first sort of saw something. Oh, bloody hell, that's an amazing film. Who made that? And at the end, Anna Hall's name came up in 2004 when she made a film called Edge of the City about social workers in Leeds, which was quite remarkable, a brilliant access film. The kind of film Roger Graef might well have made, in fact. But amazing access to social services and following them and exploring some of the issues they were dealing with. Anna's made a variety of films, most recently Hunt for Britain's Sex Gangs, which you might have seen if you came to the viewing yesterday in Cinema 2, or if you saw it on Channel 4 about 3 weeks ago, which was on a related theme as well to Edge of the City, about Asian gangs grooming white girls and the problems of trying to prosecute those cases. She's also done things like Muslim Driving School for BBC 2, Kids Behind Bars, BBC 3, Borrow a Baby for Channel 4. So a variety of films, often getting access over a long period. The Hunt for Britain's Sex Gangs, it was Anna who secured the access with the police to follow a police investigation over 3 years. And often dealing with quite controversial and sensitive subjects. Roger Graef, how do you introduce a legend? Roger, the eponymous hero of this session, my hero, certainly. I mentioned to Roger a few months ago that it was my 50th birthday this year, and he said, I started making films 50 years ago. It was like, my God, you've been making documentaries all my life. That's incredible. He's got an OBE, he's a fellow of Bafta, he's got more awards. Do you know how many awards you've got?
It sounds embarrassing, but actually I don't.
There you go.
Because I have so many, it's just because,
No, I'm sure it's because you've lost count.
No, it isn't.
And he's a visiting professor variously. He's been a visiting professor variously at Oxford, the LSE, Bournemouth, criminologist, founding board member of Channel 4. Basically a legend. And someone anyone involved in documentaries could learn more in a lifetime than this man's already forgotten, frankly. So that's us. Now, I'd just like to get a sense of who you are, so we kind of get a sense of where to pitch things. So could you just raise your hands if you work in broadcast documentary? Okay, good. And if you work in non-broadcast documentary, either theatrical or online or whatever? Okay. And if you're sort of not in documentary at all, just interested? Okay, so it's kind of mixture of all that, really. So what we're going to be talking about particularly today is ethics around observational documentary. So not constructed reality, not stuff where things have been set up, where things are very carefully controlled, which there's a lot of, but that sort of what some might call more pure form, if they're being snobs, of documentary observational. Roger, what are the particular issues that differentiate it from other types of
thank you, Brian, for that very nice introduction. But the only bit that you left out, which is relevant to this, is that I was a director of stage plays and opera and television drama for 9 years before I started my 50 years of documentaries. And so I went into documentaries fascinated. I was at the Actors Studio for 5 years as an observer, and that, as you may know, there's a hyper-naturalistic style of acting, and which we were studying what was called, Lee Strasberg would call the significant detail of character, how you can tell a lot about people by just, watching them be real. And then I saw One More River, the CBC film about the South with no commentary, and was bowled over by just how powerful that was, not to be told what to think. And then when I started making documentaries, I was still staging quite a lot of the scenes we shot, although I let some of them flow. The first film I made was about a thalidomide child, and we watched him fight with his brothers, with his feet, things like that. The naturalistic scenes were the powerful stuff. John Huston bullying his son, but not his daughter, that kind of thing, where the reality took over from whatever, the sort of structure I'd imposed. And then we got a commission to do a series on the English language from the BBC and 4 other broadcasters. And I thought, I'm on a journey which I've actually been encouraging younger filmmakers to go as well, where I started with communication theory and all this stuff with people with pipes, smoking, talking about it. And I thought, no, let's just go down to where we think it happens, between people, in schools, in families, in diplomacy, and in work. And we started out in politics, in the Senate, the US Senate. We had access to the Senate and Senator Mondale trying to communicate to Nixon. And I was whispering to Charles Stewart, pan left, pan right. And he turned to me and said, tell me what you want, and then I will get it. But do not interrupt my shooting. At which point, the journey I had been on as a director, telling everybody where to stand, what to do, and how to hold the teacup, stopped completely. And I gave in to the Canadian style of verite, not the French. The French style of cinema verite is actually quite artistic. Jean Rouch, people like that, really do fancy filmmaking. Chris Marker as well. But the Canadians were purists. They really were purists. And so were the Maisels, who were, Al was here last year. They really do just get access and follow the subject. And so that's what we did. We started at that point to renounce the directorial control and just simply agree in advance. I worked out, this is important again for you guys, I worked out at that point a proposal about how the terms of filming, which I have used ever since. We've used ever since 1972. And that is that 50 years? 51 years? Right. Anyway, since 1972 anyway. And it was this. I thought to myself, what would I want if somebody wanted to make a film about me? And I'd want the following things. I'd want to agree what the subject was. So they don't just getting access, kind of go sniffing around for what used to be known as good stuff, right? Whatever it was. But, we had to agree the subject. My work, or as it were, their work, is more important than the film. So if something is happening that's being affected badly by the filmmaking or it's too private, I would want the right to say, please switch off. But having agreed to be filmed, we'd both agree that I'd say you can resume filming now. And thirdly, that there would be a condition of confidentiality that was respected, because the films we make are about process. They're not really stories. They're institutional access films about process, about how adoption works, how the UN works, how the British government works, how a decision is made. But it's really not a scandal about one particular thing. It's about the understanding the institution. So we said, right, there will be things that are confidential, and you can either tell me now or when you see the film, for accuracy, bless you, fairness and confidentiality. Now the fairness, of course, we can't do more than just listen to, because the copyright rests with the broadcaster and the control rests with the broadcaster. But confidentiality and accuracy, we agree. And all the legal departments who've resisted this over the years accept the fact that that's how we get the access. And so I've used those terms with all the police forces, with the Home Office, with social workers. They haven't changed since 1972, because my principle, and this is the one ethical principle, and Anne has heard me say this to our previous masterclasses around the Academy kind of network. Don't ask somebody to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. Right? That seems to me the real problem, the ethical test, because so many people get a kind of what I call ethical novocaine when they come into television, and you find yourself doing things that you wouldn't do yourself. Now, that doesn't mean, and we will discuss this, and it's on our agenda, that you don't come into situations where in normal life you wouldn't go, like a discussion between the consultant and the parents of a dying child. You would not say, oh, do you mind if I sit in on that, right? I mean, obviously you couldn't, but on the other hand, if you're making the film about that process, you have to steel yourself and do something you wouldn't do in normal life. But generally speaking, the respect you want for yourself, you have to give to your subject, and that's the principle. And giving up control is the thing that makes it observational, not a conventional documentary. Sorry,
wonderful segue into our first clip. Thank you very much. Very well planned. It's all carefully planned, obviously. And the first clip is exactly what you're talking about. So it's from Great Ormond Street, and it's a clip where a consultant's talking to a family. And the key things here are thinking about consent and how you get the consent that you need to film and then to broadcast. So we'll have a look at the film first.
This is the end of...
There's one thing we have to keep in mind.
The end of the play.
The skill, the experience, we gain from doing the complex surgery can benefit a lot of other patients within the same specialty. We understand more, we improve our skill, and that sort of knowledge, that sort of experience can be used to improve the well-being of many other children as well.
The end of the clip.
Yeah.
But shall I explain a little
Yeah.
bit about this anyway? I'm sorry. How many of you have seen any of Great Ormond Street? There have been 9 on television already. Well, some of you. Okay, the series itself is quite interesting how we got the access, which is that I was offered a general sort of tour of the hospital by the chairman of the board. And as I went around, I said, there have been millions of films on Children's Hospital on television, but nobody's ever understood how hard it is to run something like that. And we then we got access in principle to make a series that was going to be different from the usual. I'm sorry that clip isn't the one that we wanted, because if you haven't seen it, we filmed, well, I'll get there. And I'll try to do it quickly. We took 2 years of discussion, meeting after meeting with teams, the heads of all the teams and departments and so on, in which they said, we don't want any more heroic nurses, heroic doctors, right? We've done that. They've probably filmed more than any other hospital in the world, possibly, certainly in Britain. So come up with something else. And the conversation included the then commissioning editor, and then Richard Klein and Rolly Keating at the head of BBC Two. We had lots of meetings just about what territory wasn't yet explored. And then Charlotte Moore took over Richard's job. She came down, and so these are meetings with the hospital teams as well and their PR people. And we finally decided that the most interesting area was the limits of their knowledge. Now that is unusual, because most of the time doctors want to appear as masters of the universe that know everything, and their confidence is part of their secret in managing things. But they were willing to let us film those cases where they didn't know what to do. And that is consistent with what I was describing earlier. When we go into institutions and ask for access, we always say, give us a decision you don't know the answer to. Not your most controversial one, but one that is really genuinely open, and that's what we want to follow, is how you get through that journey. So that's what we did. And the first 3 films, with children who were dying of illnesses they didn't know what to do about, or thought the operation was going to be worse than the life that they would have afterwards if it worked, even if it worked. Philosophically, it's very rich, with them saying, in one of in the intensive care unit, the guy says, the head of it says, living is more than just breathing. You have to remember what you did yesterday and what you're going to do tomorrow. That kind of thing. I mean, it was full of little aperçus, like Victor Chentner in that little clip. So, but at the end of the first 3 films, quite a few of those children had died, like Brian. The sad thing is you can't see the clip, but Brian's actually in it, and he's the only child in that film anyway who's old enough to talk for himself, and he asks, what will happen to my heart when you take it out? It was a heart transplant. It's a really touching scene when he asks that. But the sum total of those 3 films was pretty depressing. It was very tough watching. The Times, to their great credit, David Chater said, it's hard to imagine television that could be more powerful or more difficult to watch. And it is. So they thought their money would go down. They thought it was going to be really depressing. But actually, the money went up, and they said the quality of attention we give to each case is not represented fairly when so many of these children die in this series. So I said, okay, don't worry, we'll put that last caption there, 961 cases in a year, because you suddenly, it's like pulling back from a close-up. You've had a close-up for an hour of 3 cases, really intense, tremendously heartbreaking stuff, but you needed to know that they succeed most of the time, not just that these were not, as it were, typical, because we had chosen the most difficult cases. So it wasn't typical, and we wanted to reframe it so that it was. And having done that, their money went up, and they offered us 6 more.
But in terms of consent,
yes,
I want to bring you back
you're
to
quite
consent.
right, sorry.
So in terms of consent, you've got a parents whose 8-year-old is terminally ill.
Yes.
How do you go about saying to them, we'd like to film?
Well, actually, the way it was done, and Marina Parker is here, who did films in the second series, And Maureen, if I get any of this wrong, where are you? You move forward there. And I think Emma Hindley may be here too, but in the first series what we did was we had the doctors and the nurses approach the parents for us and said, the BBC is doing this. And we devised, again, on the same basis that if I were them, I would want this kind of difference. We said, we'll divide the consent into 2 stages. If you're coming into a hospital, we are dying children, what do you ask? Well, we said we need to film them at all if we're going to do this story, but we don't have to ask them to commit irrevocably to being on the final film. So we divided consent into 2 stages, and we used that later in the adoption thing. So the consent to film was presented by the doctors, and then the conversation was taken over by the filmmakers. Once the parents said, yes, I'm willing to meet, wasn't that right? And the first conversation was for research purposes. Is that right, Marina?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, so that was an initial introduction to the family by the doctors. And that, by the way, is exactly what's happened with social workers, probably your adoption series as well. They won't let us have direct access to anybody, but once we had parents willing to meet us, then we took over.
And so you film, the parents say yes, you can film.
Yes.
You then film.
Yeah.
Their child then dies.
Yes.
At what point after, presumably you don't rush in 2 days after the child's died and said, can we show the stuff?
No, of course not.
At what point do you then go back and say, how do you judge the vulnerability of parents in that case?
Well, you have to go back. So you're in touch. Very often it's one parent or another, isn't it, Marina? Do you want to answer that question?
I was just going to say, just to go back a bit earlier, that often we'd get the nurses to make the initial contact rather than the doctors, because the doctors are quite powerful, and sometimes you felt that doctors would be harder to say no to. If a doctor says, oh, would you meet the team, whereas a nurse is more approachable, so they would feel more able to say no or yes to a nurse.
That's a really interesting point, because I think that power imbalance is one
Yes.
that permeates television in certainly this kind of film, in the sense that, you know, we're from the BBC or from Channel 4,
Yes.
and, you know, we're kind of usually we're confident and all of those things that means that there is a big power imbalance between us as filmmakers and contributors, and how you manage that, how you know, I'm sure the 3 of us could probably talk most people into most things given enough time. So the question is, how do you manage?
Except social workers.
Except social workers. How do you not abuse that power?
Well, I mean, in a way, the test was by giving the power to them. And that's the point about the 2 stages. First, they can say no to filming, and then they can say no to having film used. And we were talking yesterday about Sebastian in your film. Do you want to say that? Because it was really interesting there. Do you want to stand up so everyone can see you? Just
stand there.
Yeah, well, talk to them.
Which bit about yesterday?
No, well, Sebastian, I mean, this was a child who died, but the parents wanted it shown because it was a sort of tribute to him. Isn't that what
So obviously we spent a lot of time in the hospital, you know, days and days, weeks and weeks, months and months with the families. It was never just one conversation. You know, you'd be there all day chatting to people, lots of people that weren't going to be in the film. You know, you'd just be a presence in the ward. So everyone got used to you being around and got used to a camera being there. So it becomes quite a semi-permeable thing between being filmed and not being filmed, which is all part of the seduction that you have to guard against in a way, because people feel it's less of a big deal. You know, when a big camera crew arrive, everyone sort of freezes initially, and then you get used to it. So it never felt like a great big huge precipice of a question. It was always a gentle thing. And as Roger says in my film, it was an operation that was very. It was an operation that was meant to succeed, and it didn't. And this boy died after having prepared for a year in hospital for the operation. So it was a huge shock to them. But they, I think, felt that the film was going to be a tribute to him and something to hold on to and something that they could grab at after they'd lost everything. So it didn't feel like a great dilemma, in a way, for them to say yes to it.
Well, it's interesting. I spoke to Simon Gilchrist, who should have been on the panel too with us. He made a film in the first series and series produced the second. He said that actually once people had agreed to be filmed and then were shown the final film, nobody exercised the right to pull that. Nobody. But there had been people, and indeed quite a lot of filming had been done in several stories, where one parent hadn't really taken part in the conversation, in the agreement, and suddenly did, and decided to veto it. And so we lost the best scene in one of the films very close to the end of post-production, just because the mother, who had no part in the conversation, didn't want to, she said no, and she wouldn't see the film, she wouldn't meet us, and we lost it and had to replace it. So there are losses all the way through. But then in the renal film that Simon was making, where the hospital life was so boring.
We need to move on.
Okay, sorry. Fine. All I was going to say is those were parents volunteering, saying, "Could I be in the film, please?" That's all I just wanted to throw. I'll shut up.
Anna, I want to come to you now, and a challenging consent issue you had with someone who you could have a conversation with, and then they had anterograde amnesia. So 5 minutes later, they couldn't remember.
Yes, so I was making a series in a brain injury rehabilitation unit for Channel 4, so we were working in 2 different units. And, I work in a very similar way. I go in, I get to know people, I make friends, I get to know everyone who's working in the unit. And one of the stories that the neuropsychologist was telling us about was a lady who had been mugged. She was a single mom, she was in her late 30s, and she had what they called a 5-minute memory. So she had no short-term memory at all. And long-term? No short-term memory. She had sort of retained long-term memory, right. But she couldn't remember, and she couldn't remember meeting me 5 minutes later. Yeah. So obviously that's a massive challenge. I mean, I was really interested in this story. She had a daughter who came to see her every week. Her daughter was now 15. When the accident had happened, when the injury had happened, the daughter was 9. And Kay was just absolutely, she could remember that she had a daughter, but she couldn't remember how old her daughter was. So it was, it was a sort of a tantalising sequence.
Let's see a clip, and then we can talk about how you get access.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
What did you get? Anything nice? Your tracksuit, obviously.
She's only just starting to come to terms as a teenager, I think. She keeps on saying I'm 11. I hate going there, but it's the only thing keeping my mum going, me and my nan.
Jess has just been. She's only left she left at 8 o'clock.
I want proof of me and Jess together.
When Jess first came, we videoed it for you so that you can have a look. Do you want us to go down to your room and show you that?
Yeah.
I think she brought you some sweets and...
I've been eating sweets.
You've been eating sweets? Well, Jess brought them for you before.
Did she?
She did. This is from today, it's from earlier.
Did you get anything nice? Your tracksuit, obviously. No, you've already got that. What else did you get? No, I don't know.
She came here, it was probably about 6:30 when she came. And she left about 8 o'clock.
And she left here about 8 o'clock?
Yeah.
What time is it now? Well, it's only 8:30.
Yeah.
So she only left half an hour ago.
That's right.
All I'll say is, God, I feel like I haven't seen Jess for days, months even.
Yeah.
How old is Jess?
She's 15 now. I feel guilty that she's harder to love.
Last line.
Really,
feel guilty that she's harder to love. So how on earth do you get? She's clearly a vulnerable adult, very vulnerable. How do you get and maintain consent from someone who can't remember the conversation 5 minutes later?
What we did there was I was working very closely with the neuropsychologist at the unit, and he was very comfortable. He'd given access to the unit. He wanted us to show what the problems were in terms of brain rehabilitation. I love making films about people who, we look at and we might judge and we might have a particular view about. And so, Kay. Basically, we had the consent of the unit. I talked at length with him, and then I went to see Kay's mum, who was alive and was obviously very involved, and I went to see Jessie, her daughter, and they said that they felt that it was a good idea and that they would be supportive of us making this film. And then I went to talk to Kay, and I explained what we were doing, and she, you know, was asking lots of questions. But the everyday issue for me was that every single time I went back to see Kay, I had to get her consent again. So, you know, that went on.
Your tracksuit,
No,
obviously.
she I would say, I always managed to persuade her, and it was a bit of a nightmare over 9 months. But there was one occasion where we were filming, she'd consented. I mean, really interesting, fantastic, you know, just to see Kay developing, because they were trying to get her to understand that her daughter was 15. And on one occasion we were filming, and she would always say, how old is Jessie now? How old is Jessie? And then on one occasion, they would always say, how old do you think she is? And then on one occasion, she said, is she 15? So we did have a real breakthrough with Kay that we filmed that was amazing. But on the consent issue, one time I decided that we were filming a meeting, it was all fine. We went outside and we were shooting through a glass door, and she completely freaked out, said, what's that? What's that? It's a camera, you know, and then I had to stop at that point. And of course she'd forgotten that she'd consented because we'd gone outside of the room. So it was, you know, and then in that process, you know, I made the film. I showed the film to Kay's, obviously I showed the film to the unit, to the psychologist at the unit. But we showed the film to Kay's mum and her daughter. They were very happy. We didn't show, I think the unit, if I remember correctly now, I think the unit showed the film to Kay and sort of talked her through all of that, but she couldn't remember that she had been a part of it. And you know, at the very end, I would say, Kay, do you remember me? And she would always say, I think I remember your hair, you know, and she could sort of had a vague recollection of me. But actually recently her daughter has just got in touch with me and said she's gone to another unit and she's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and her daughter wanted a copy again of the film to show the unit, and said that she was doing really, really well now and she was living independently.
that's good, yeah.
So that was, you know, sort of great success for Kay, really.
I don't mean to trump this because we haven't made the film, but we were negotiating quite a lot of last autumn with someone who had 6 personalities, and the question of getting consent from whichever personality she was something we had to negotiate quite a lot of the time. And in the end, I mean, we did it, and her psychiatrist was all happy, and her son was happy, and so on. But typically, and this is a problem, right? We're in show business. The personality that she was mostly, who was most competent to say yes, was very quiet and didn't register on camera at all. So in the end, we had a commission ready to go, but we all agreed that nobody would watch this film.
So in that situation, you've got multiple personality disorder, you've got 6 personalities. If 4 of the personalities say yes and 2 of them say no way, do you film?
Yes. Because then one of the personalities is going to be quite an angry person and isn't what the majority, it's sort of majority vote, democratically you go.
Okay, so 2 of the 3. You've got a split.
No, 3 you wouldn't. No, then you wouldn't, because you don't want to cause a crisis for them. If they suddenly rake up as the person who hates it and sees themselves having been filmed, then they would really, God knows what would happen. But if most of them, I mean, a lot of disassociation, which is what this is because of child abuse and so on, and the thing they become is a 6-year-old child, at which point they are not getting competent to be able to make their own decision. But when she was 42 herself, she was, and she said, fine, yeah, I want this, you know.
Gillick competency.
Yes.
So this is about when, normally, with consent, we've talked about filming an 8-year-old who unfortunately we didn't get to see from Great Ormond Street, Brian, but normally filming with children, you need the child's consent and you need the parent's consent. Where do you feel that a childhood ends? So at what point can you disregard the parent's consent and film anyway?
At the age of 16. You can't disregard the parents when the child is under 16, unfortunately. But the Gillick competence, the question of child's consent, is a really interesting one because it isn't. The Gillick thing was about an Irish case where a doctor prescribed a contraceptive against the wishes of the parents, and the court ruled, and they went to court, and the court ruled that the doctor was right, and that if a child is competent enough to decide for themselves, they have the right to do so. And we filmed a 10-year-old in a dispute between parents who wanted to say some pretty rude things about her mother. And we said the child wanted to do this is his child's consent, and that was against the wishes of the mother. But the child was about the fact that she had taken off and left all the children with the father. So in that sense, you're playing God the whole time. It's just what you said.
So you've
it's
got
really
a 10-year-old
difficult.
who says, I want to be filmed.
Yes.
You've got a mother who says, I don't want her to be filmed. Where's the father?
He was looking after all the children. He did want to be filmed because he was left holding the
consent
three of
from
them.
one parent, but not the other parent.
Yes, but the film was about the fact that she'd taken off, leaving it. It's called Who Needs Fathers? It was Nick Points made it. But it was, that was the question. And the girl says, I really am pissed off with my mother for leaving. And then we finally persuaded the mother to take part. But she never liked that scene, of course, because she was attacked by her own daughter on camera. So you can hardly imagine.
So one parent's good enough, under 16.
Well, no, but you need, it's a big ethical problem. In that case, the father had care of the children because she'd run off. Okay, so he had the legal control, as it were. So it wasn't just a kind of literal question. It was he was looking after 3 children that she had abandoned.
When I made Edge of the City, when we were filming with social worker teams there, the social workers absolutely the Gillett competency was their sort of bar, so that if we were working with children that were 12, 13, 14, and the social workers and us together felt that they were Gillett competent, we would go ahead and film.
Yes.
So,
there are 12-year-olds who are sort of going on 25, and there are 12-year-olds who are going on 7.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So it's just about a judgment.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, it's about a judgment of, who's around that child, who's looking after them, who's keeping them safe, who's protecting them. We have a duty of care as filmmakers. But if the social worker who's working with that, in that situation, the social workers working with that child felt, and we felt, that they understood the process of being filmed and what that meant. And often it is, isn't it, about what it means to be transmitted. And in one of the cases that I've got now coming up that we'll show in a minute, it's about what does it mean on transmission for those children.
Exactly.
And what does it mean, who's looking after those children at the transmission point? Are they safe? So I think all of those issues you have to think about all of those.
Right. Should we look at Hold Me Tight?
Yes, can we queue up Alex and Hold Me Tight? So we've talked about, we're sort of moving towards, we've talked about vulnerable adults, even more problematic vulnerable children. Again, looking at, do you want to briefly introduce the Alex clip?
Okay, how many of you have seen Hold Me Tight, Let Me Go, Kim Longinata's film? Not very many. You must try and get it. It really is. It'll be in the videotheque. We showed it here a long time ago, but it's a wonderful film. And Kim is coming and does a long interview on Sunday. It's a film about a school for the most disturbed children in Britain, in England anyway. And they're 5 to 11-year-old. And it's a 3-year course in which the 3 years are involved. It's a psychoanalytic mixture of psychoanalytic and other kind of treatment in which they try in 3 years to get these children first to realize where they end and another person begins. That's a big deal because they had not achieved that. 2, that they could take some responsibility for their own lives. They weren't always just having things done to them, and that may mean as simple as cutting out, colored glasses to wear or something, but just that they started to increase their own competence over their own life. And 3rd, and this was crucial, they could be judged and judge themselves about how well they had done that without falling apart, because very often they've been abused and hit for anything, they just expected any judgment to be a bad one. So that it would take 3 years. Now Alex is meeting his mother, who the mothers come in occasionally, and the parents come in occasionally, and some of the scenes have been very painful. In order to film, we only had 1 of 5 houses full of children, of 36. We had a house of 5. Of those, 2 of the girls didn't want to be filmed, and the other kids came forward saying, we do want to be filmed. And this scene is with Alex's mum, Alex was one of those kids, and the mum agreed to be filmed herself as well as letting Alex be filmed, because she felt completely cut off from the decision-making around Alex, who had been sent to this school, because it's the school of last resort before they really go into kind of institution. And she wanted that, and she stayed friends with Kim and so on. But as you will see from this scene, where at the end of a very painful, quite a long scene, where he's got a list of questions about what's happened to his father, where is his father, and so on. He wants to give her a hug, and she's playing at resisting him, but it's a very poignant example of what, the problem in that family. The father's disappeared completely, and the mother doesn't know what to do. So let's play it. This is the end of that scene.
Mummy and Abby to go outside instead then. Okay? No! Well, I'm coming out with you.
No, you can stay there, Alex.
No, I want... No!
Yeah, we'll see Alex in a minute when he's calmed down.
What's wrong, Abby? Lovely to see you again, Hayley.
Yeah.
Don't go. I'm not leaving Mummy on the phone, okay? I'm not leaving Mummy.
I need to go, Alex. They told you ages ago.
Please. You need to say goodbye, Mummy. Mummy, shoo. Please don't go, Mummy. Mummy's going to go, sweetheart, okay? Bye, Mummy. I want a kiss. I want a kiss, Mummy. She just gave you a nice big kiss. No, Abby, kiss. I want a kiss. Come on, sweetheart. Can we get a kiss then? Oh, lovely kiss. Oh, see you soon. Bye-bye. Abby.
Love you.
Bye-bye. That's me. Good girl. Abby, come back. Abby. Abby. You're so horrible. You don't even let me wave goodbye.
Mummy gave you a lovely big kiss. I saw her. Did you see that big kiss from Abby? She got your whole nose.
But I didn't want to wave goodbye. I always do it to Edna.
Really painful, but very intimate. And
So what happened to Alex?
well, he's got better in the course of the 3 years. That's what happened to Alex.
And would you have broadcast if he hadn't?
Well, there's an interesting point. In that scene, in this list of questions, one of the questions is, why does my father not want to see me? And when we showed the film, or the school showed that his sequences to Alex, he said, I want that question taken out for the television. I don't want that for my school and other people to know that my father doesn't want to see me. So we took it out at Alex's request. But he said, I don't mind in the films that we showed at IDFA, where it won prize and here and so on. That was fine. But on television, that came out at Alex's request. And yeah, it certainly helps that he got better, yes. I mean, whether we would have shown it anyway if he didn't, I think probably we would, actually, because it's the journey that the school is on and that the kids are on is terribly important. But it certainly helps that he did. I mean, we weren't faced with that problem.
So the fact that he's specifically identifying one question and saying, I don't want that broadcast, that suggests he's very clear about telly and what's going on and his consent.
Now there's another moment in the film which we aren't showing you, but one of the kids who volunteered to be filmed, came forward when the cameras were there, Ben. He had never, ever talked to anybody, including, in the social work world there, about the fact that his mum had stabbed his father. I can't remember, one of his parents had stabbed the other one. And he was busy, he was very, very angry, and they were asking him, why is he so angry? And he said, I don't want to say it in front of the camera. And the social worker said, look, well, if you say it, you might actually help other children who are in the same situation. So he does disclose for the very first time on camera that his mum stabbed his father. And that was because the camera was there.
Yeah, there's a clip we may show later on from a film called Lost Girls of South Africa, which is about rape.
Indeed. Where
one of the little girls disclosed that she'd been raped, that she'd never told anyone before. And it was because this bizarre setting of these people with cameras, these white people with cameras, she felt safe to say something that she couldn't say into the school that she was in.
See, now that, taking Reen's point and your point about power, it's a gift, right? I regard every bit of our access as a kind of gift, a privilege to enter other people's worlds. And that's why we have to treat it with such care and respect. But the fact that we can help them, and I've always said, people say, how do camera affect people's behavior? Well, in my experience, they behave better. The only reason why I've ever gone undercover in things like a classroom is because I think the kids would not behave honestly if they knew they were being filmed, if the film is about classroom chaos, which the film we made was. So, our responsibility is to try and help capture what it is they do, or really do, as closely as possible. But also in moments like that, like yours and ours, if you can help somebody own their own experience. That's what psychoanalysis is about, you know, coming to terms with your worst fears and realizing you don't die at the end of it. Hopefully. God.
So I'm going to move on to Kids Behind Bars clip. So Anna, this is a clip where Callum is disagreeing with someone fairly strongly in a secure unit. Do you want to tell us briefly about it, and we'll play the clip?
So it's called Calum. Calum is 13 here. I was working at a secure children's home in Bristol, and this, Calum was the most interesting child. There were 24 kids in here. Calum was in the unit for attempted murder, which had been, the charge had then been reduced to attempted manslaughter. And Calum was a very volatile young man, very difficult. And I had a colleague working in there who'd been working in for a couple of months actually before I started, you know, smoothing the way, getting to know the kids, you know, befriending them. We did a lot of work with cameras and workshops and so on, just really, you know, securing our relationship with the young people. And Calum, I had been told, was very volatile and very difficult. And the Calum that I met was charming and lovely and funny. But, you know, he was unpredictable. So sometimes we'd turn up and he'd say, you know, piss off, I don't want to film today. This clip is caught on CCTV. Obviously there's CCTV in every room. And this is about halfway through. Calum was there for about 18 months, and this is about halfway through.
Okay.
Once lessons are over, they can choose their activities. Even then, there's a member of staff there. But it's at this time when things can spiral out of control very quickly. The care worker watching Calum can't stop what started as a tiny push, escalating into a dangerous row. She presses her emergency flare, and within 20 seconds, more staff arrive to stop the fight. The culprits are physically restrained and taken to their rooms, but this has now become a critical incident.
This is very serious. One of those on the head, it could kill you. A pool ball at full force on the head, it could kill you. Yeah. And here they are. It's gone from being a bit of a messing around to actually a really serious incident, and it's gone just like that. No real warning at all. Absolutely flipped just like that. Calum's got an anger issue. That comes out clearly here. Very, very, very suddenly, he flips out, if you like. You wouldn't want to be seeing incidents like this just before somebody was released. That would be a real worry. But he's got quite a long time to go before he leaves from here. One would hope that there's quite some improvement and that we don't see incidents like this. It's really not what you want to see at all.
Quite volatile. And he withdraws consent.
Yes, so what happens is that, you know, we have a good working relationship with Calum, and towards the end of the filming I decided that I wanted to do some exteriors using a crane, and this is really interested in terms of, you know, how you keep your access going and you know, the different ways that you choose to film. So we had been working as a tiny crew in the unit, and I decided at the end that it was a very, very interior, and I wanted to try and sort of, you know, let it breathe. So I got a crane and I got a cameraman, and we told the kids what we were doing. So my colleague was in the unit at the time, and everybody knew what was happening, you know, and there was lots of interest about this crane. But Calum didn't like it, and Calum didn't like it because he couldn't control the situation. Whereas, of course, when it was me and my colleague in the unit, he could control the situation. So it's really interesting. And, you know, so then, as you know, I have to make a big decision about what I'm going to do. You know, we were playing around with the crane and we were doing all sorts of amazing shots. And at one point, we were quite close to Calum, and he started throwing a stone at me. And I have to decide. We're trying to diffuse the situation. My colleague's there. Workers are there. But Calum didn't like it. I had to make a decision. Am I going to carry on with doing what I'm doing, or am I going to, you know, stop because Calum has asked me to stop the whole thing? not just filming Calum. So, you know, we got Calum out of the way. I had to decide to carry on. I carried on doing the stuff that I needed to do. It was, you know, we had 2 days of getting these shots at the end. Calum didn't like the fact that he didn't have control in that situation, so he withdrew consent. And then, you know, I knew I knew Calum was volatile, but I had also seen Calum being brought round, and I thought that my relationship with Calum was strong enough to survive, you know, what any of the fallout was going to be at that point. So and that's what happened. You know, I then had, you know, quite a long time, probably about 3, 4, 5 months before we had a kind of a lock-off point to work with Calum. I worked with Calum. I met his parents. I showed the film to his parents, and actually, in the end, that scene was at the beginning of the film. At the end of Calum's time, there was a very similar scene in the lounge, and where a fight broke out, and Calum totally withdrew. And in fact, there was a very funny scene because, in fact, somebody had dropped their radio. Calum picked up and called for help for the staff to come and help him. So it was very interesting. And actually, what Calum could see was that there was progression, and that his behaviour had got a lot better in the unit. And, you know, that the staff were talking about, you know, this incident, and we showed Calum this incident, said, you're not going to like this, but this is what your behaviour was like. And then throughout the course of the film, his behaviour changed. So, you know, I had to work very, very closely with Calum, and it was real, you know, nail-biting, are we going to get there or not? But we did. And
so that's a case where you show the film,
yeah.
And as a result of that, you managed to persuade them.
Yeah.
Roger, with kids in care, you're dealing with, again, very vulnerable young people, and we're going to see a clip where another young man is
volatile. Quite
violent and volatile, and then you'll explain to us how you got that consent through. So, yeah.
Connor's recent visit has made him want to see his mum even more. He's owed 3 visits, so he's not prepared to wait.
Hi, Chris Rogers here to see Connor. Thank you. Yeah. Connor, you all right? Do you want to have a chat? Can I sit next to you? Is that all right? I'm not going to take offence. You've got pretty much what you wanted.
No, I ain't, Chris, and you know I haven't.
So what haven't you got that you wanted?
I want a contact now.
What, now? Right now?
Yeah.
You're not going to get it right now. I've just told you when I'm going to aim for.
That's what you think.
Connor, I don't want to fall out with you over this, mate. Because I actually thought ringing you up this morning, I'd have some good news for you, that you can have it, and you'd be quite happy about it. But you're doing the same thing. You push the goalpost each time. You get one bit, and then you want more and more and more and more. It doesn't work like that, mate.
What, so I've got to abide by every single fucking thing you say?
You have for the context.
Prick. Fuck off, go home. See you later, bye. Fuck off.
Because Connor is owed visits, Chris goes to see the Grange manager to try and fix an earlier trip to see his mother. It's agreed.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon.
Chris goes to give Connor the good news.
And I've just got to find him now. I'll get one of the staff to find out where he is.
But he's stormed off.
Connor, I've got something to tell you, mate. Do you not want to know what me and Simon have agreed?
Unless it's kicking the shit, you know.
You don't want to know that you can have contact in like a week and a half?
Because I can do what the fuck I want, when I want, how I want. I want you to fuck off. I want a different social worker, that's what I want.
Put that in writing and I'll take it to Sue.
I fucking will. I want you to
I'm asking you just to do that.
You chat so much shit out of your fucking mouth, it's unreal.
All right, Connor. I've seen what he's done to others. Seen the bruises on staff's heads and things like that. Problem is, he's probably going to get in trouble now and wreck it, which will be the problem.
Think he will be?
Yeah, what I'm just being careful of is nothing comes flying over at my car halfway past.
Do you think he will do?
Could could imagine him doing it. So. I've stopped.
So, in the first meeting with the social worker, he's sitting there, he's talking, you can see, obviously the camera's obviously there in the room, he's clearly consenting, you know, he's allowing you to film that. Later on, when he's in the bushes, away back there, and clearly very, very angry, and not thinking about whether he's being filmed or not, then pretty arguable whether or not he's consenting at that point. And certainly when he's attacking the car, well, there's a lack of clarity, to say the least, about his consent.
Simon Gilchrist, who was shooting, was sitting right next to the driver, and he could clearly see that. But as you say, it wasn't important to him at that point. But here, the real ethical dilemma that this particular scene, and indeed the whole Kids in Care. How many of you saw Kids in Care? Can I just ask that? Some of you, but not very many. It's a film about a handful of children in care in Coventry, in a particular children's home, and they all act up in different ways. And it's our responsibility to protect them from the consequences of their own actions in the longer term. And in terms of that scene, he is attacking, you know, he's committing a criminal offense, criminal damage. And so the police did want the rushes, and we said no. And in the end, they dropped the charge. He apologized to the social worker as it happened. But we had 7 different screenings of that sequence, which has been edited by Louise, but has a moment when the other social worker, the head of the place, comes and controls him and so on. And Chris says, I don't think I'll ever work with Connor again. But actually, he does apologize. But what Connor's view of this is that he doesn't think the police should be involved or that anything should come of this because he's 13. He says, look, you're 14. He said, you know, I've got a whole life to live in front of me, and, you know, you guys just... He doesn't really understand what he's done. So we had to take that under our wing. And we finally devised, I was rather proud of this idea, that you don't see him commit the offense because we cut to black, but you hear him do it and you've seen him rush towards the car. So it's perfectly obvious what happened, and then we have the bloody hand on the windscreen of where it happened. So you infer the whole thing, but we had protected him from being seen doing that. And not only did we show it 6 or 7 times to Coventry, their lawyers, the social workers, and so on, but they arranged for someone from Barnardo's, a social worker, to show it to Connor independently of the care home and of Coventry, to see if he understood what the longer term consequences of that would be and how he felt about it being included. And he said it was okay.
So he's 13?
He's 14.
At that time?
Yeah.
And so when, in 10 years' time, he comes back and goes, you have no right to film that. I was a child. What did I know? How dare you? And it's still on the web now.
Well, it's a good point that he might do that, but actually since he had consented it and has been on the web for the last couple of years, and he's now 17, or 16 anyway, and he hasn't done that comeback, I think that's a risk we have to take. I mean, I talked this over with Kim Longinotto, because in a way those children are younger, less able to think ahead, and her view is, first of all, we absolutely made it a condition that, if possible, it wouldn't go on YouTube, and also that the kids physically change quite a lot. Now, 14-year-olds don't change as much, but certainly 11-year-old Alex will be very different even now, 5 years later. So we kind of get protected by that. But sometimes there's a sort of halo effect in filming children, even when they misbehave, that gives them a certain degree of protection because somebody's paid attention to them. The feature that all these children have in common is they're invisible. And when somebody, especially even to their own parents and grandparents, so when we come along, sympathetically pay attention to them, that is actually positive. So Connor's now a chef, trainee chef, doing quite well, reunited with his mother, and it's a happy ending so far.
So we're going to turn a corner slightly now. We've been talking a lot about consent, and we're now moving it away from the contributors and more onto the filmmakers, and with the question of when to intervene. This is observational documentary, so the theory is you never intervene. You're a fly on the wall. Flies on the wall don't affect things. But I'm going to show you a clip now from a film I made, in fact, and then ask you what you'd do next.
Here, where a baby girl had been left to die 10 days ago, the staff preferred not to enter the room, waiting instead for one of the other children to report that the infant had died. Jesus. Look at this body. Oh God, Peter.
I think we get the idea. So, just to set the scene, we'd been, it was a film called The Dying Rooms. It was about a policy in China to deliberately let girl babies die in orphanages to keep the numbers down. And we had been going around China for about 3 weeks. We'd filmed in various orphanages. We'd found supportive evidence of this. We'd spoken to people who talked about it. But this was the first time where we had come into a situation where there was clearly a baby who had been, we'd been told by the staff there were no more babies. We'd looked at the children there were, they'd said, oh no, there's no one else. We then found that baby in there. A little girl actually took Kate into the room and showed her the child. And our fixer was very, very anxious when we came across Mei Ming. We asked one of the staff what her name was, and they said Mei Ming, which means no name. And our fixer was very anxious that we leave as quickly as possible because he knew that this was dangerous, in his opinion, for us to be there, having seen that and filmed that. We were obviously anxious to record what we needed to do, and then we left, and we came out of the building at our fixer's insistence. We got in the car, and then we went, well, what do we do now? You know, that baby's going to die. So what do we do now? So I'm just intrigued. Have we got a mic, a roving mic? Just be interested to see what has anyone brave enough to say this is what I'd do? Yes. Take the baby. Take the baby. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So you're in China. This is 17, 18 years ago. You're in China. You go back in. You take the baby. Then what do you do? Take her to a hospital. To
a hospital. Somewhere away.
So we talked about that, and we concluded that if we go back and we take the baby and take her to a hospital, the likely consequences are that we'll probably get arrested for kidnapping, and we'll lose our footage, and we'll have, you know, we were filming undercover, so all of the filming's gone. But what happens in the long term to that baby is that she goes back to that orphanage. She'll end up going back there, and we'll probably be arrested, and we'll probably be in prison in China for quite a long time, and the film will never get made. Any other thoughts? Go on, someone be brave.
Did the fixer know something like a local woman who could have...
You're absolutely right, that was the first sort of thought.
Well done.
Yeah.
You being put in prison would be a very good story. It would be fantastic publicity, and in many ways would create more noise than your documentary, if you look at it that way.
That's an interesting way of putting
more
it.
More noise in the dying rooms.
Yeah.
It was a very noisy film at the time.
That's an interesting consideration. I have to say we didn't really think that one through at length.
That's a good one.
We did, you know, that was particularly Kate's first instinct was we can't possibly leave. You know, we've got to do something, and we've got to intervene. And we talked about it, and basically our fixer was very much on the we can't possibly intervene. You don't, if you're completely deluded if you think you can affect the situation. We're in China. You're Guilos. You'll just get arrested. You know, you don't, and I'll get arrested. And even if you manage to get yourselves out of the country, I'll be in prison for the rest of my life. Don't be silly. Was his feeling. We thought, oh well, we might get arrested, but you know, would we? I'm not sure. But the problem was more what would actually happen to the child, even if we did do that, even if whether or not we got arrested, whatever, which our fixer was absolutely convinced we would, then ultimately the baby would just go back there, because that's the way it works there. You know, there are no so effective social services. There's nobody sort of looking after abandoned babies. That was what the whole film was about, the fact that these abandoned babies just ended up in these orphanages, and then they have a cap on the number of babies they're supposed to have, so they just stick them in a room and leave them to die. They have a policy that was called Jajajujwe or something like that, which was summary resolution was the translation that Human Rights Watch gave it, which was the way they keep the numbers down in the orphanages.
But also your film changed that, didn't it?
The film did, yeah.
So I mean, it is, you know, in that sense, you made the right bet, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, effectively we talked about it, and we ended up deciding that we would not intervene in any way, other than to leave the country straight away. You know, we stopped all filming. We knew we had what we needed, effectively. We left the country, we got out of China, and once we were back in Hong Kong, we phoned the orphanage. They denied she even existed. Yeah. We tried, we said, but we filmed her, and eventually they said, oh, there was a baby, but she died a couple of days ago.
Yeah. By the way, capital punishment in China is meted out for things less than murder.
Yeah.
And you might easily, or certainly the fixer might easily have had the chop.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so somebody else, Mel has her hand.
Can I just ask about consent issues with the subjects of secret filming? So what do you do about consent of that baby? How does that work?
Well, the consent when you're filming abroad is interesting, because consent is sort of a bit grayer. In theory it's not. In theory, of course, everyone has equal rights, but in practice, when something's not going to be shown in that country, then there's also the sort of public interest argument. So there are questions of when something's in the public interest, then you don't necessarily need the consent. So, for example, we didn't blur the oh no, we didn't actually show any of the workers in that orphanage, but the other children we didn't blur. You know, it was clear because it just would have been a mass of blobs, and our judgment.
That's not an ethical decision.
Well, it sort of is.
It's a television decision.
Yeah.
There's a distinction.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you did the wrong thing, because I've done the same.
Yeah.
But in terms of consent, it's a good. Have you ever filmed undercover?
I've had lots of conversations about filming in very tricky. Yeah, I mean, we did do some undercover filming for the films that I made with Brian, and we had lots of, you know, it reminds me of that situation about where do you draw the line. We were talking about, you know, girls being raped, and you know, what's your responsibility as a filmmaker if you know that somebody is going to be raped. So in those, you know, in the end, we didn't do any of that.
If you believe someone, I mean, the challenge there was this was secret filming in a hotel where we had good evidence to believe that gangs of men were taking young girls for effectively gang rape. But if you go, how do you know? How do you know what's going on behind a door? And if you do know, then surely your responsibility is to call the police, not to knock on the door with a camera. And if you do knock on the door with a camera and there's a big bunch of a large group of men there, they're probably not going to be very pleased.
Do you have the Eddie clip?
Yeah, we do.
Why don't we just show that, because it speaks directly to that.
That's a very good idea. Yeah. So that's the.
No, this is the rape. This is the different. That's the rape clip.
Yeah.
So we have wonderful, cheerful subjects here. Actually,
we're talking about clip 14.
We don't have the.
Sorry, not clip 14. Clip 13. Clip 13. So this is a good question about consent, in the sense of what do you do when clearly a contributor is not very keen to consent. Can we play that clip?
From another room in the station, senior officers watched the interview by video link.
Have you ever had any sexual relations with anybody in that car during the time you had it?
I got a girl to wank me off.
Is that the only time you've ejaculated in that car?
Yeah, that's it.
So if I just show you that, that's a photograph of a girl.
No, I don't know it. Never seen that girl.
You want me to tell you how she describes the driver? She describes that male as being an Asian male, skinny build, with glasses, in his 20s, with goofy teeth.
Yeah, how many skinny Asians are there?
She's describing you, isn't she? She's describing you because you're the person who drove her outside of Telford and raped her, aren't you?
No, that's what you're saying. Yeah?
I'm asking
it wasn't
you.
me. If anything did happen, yeah, in the car, there would have been something there, you know what I mean? For your DNA, forensics, you know what I mean? There would have been something there for you. I didn't do nothing. I don't even know that girl.
Can you explain why the person who is alleging rape against you, who you say you don't know, who you've never met before, why her telephone number is on 2 of your mobile phones?
Somebody must have just used my phone. That's the only thing.
That's a bizarre explanation.
If somebody got raped, yeah, they would have told the police straight away.
What was that text about? Simple question.
Listen, I have millions of texts to me. You think I'm going to remember some poxy little low-class evidence shit you got there?
Okay.
I don't think so.
You can just say
Yeah.
you can't remember.
No,
you don't
it's
need
just
to
you
say that.
do
do
my
you?
head in.
You said to us earlier, well, if I'd have had sex with her, you'd have found DNA or forensics or something in the car. You were right, there is DNA,
So what?
forensic
So
in
what?
the car,
I didn't
linking
rape her.
you
I didn't
and
rape
her.
her. I
Oh,
didn't-
right, so what did you do
I didn't
with
rape
her?
her.
What
Huh?
did you do with her then?
I didn't rape her.
What did you do with her?
I had sex with her.
So you had sex with her?
Listen to
Tell
this.
me about this then.
Listen to this, yeah?
The tape is now about to finish and you have just changed your story completely. So we're going to stop this interview. The time is 9 minutes to 9.
So, here's a man who clearly didn't consent to filming, and yet, as you can see, it was eventually broadcast. How can you justify that?
Well, so this was part of a film that we were making about these perpetrators and about a police investigation. I was working with a particular police officer who had said to me, you need to come on this arrest. I think out of all the people, out of all the multiple perpetrators that they were looking at, the money was on this guy getting convicted. So Matt, who was filming with me, we went on this arrest. We went in with the police as he was being arrested. We said we're from Channel 4, we're working with the police, that's all we said. And the police were totally robust and, you know, said, you know, that they didn't really give him any chance to say anything else in respect to that. I, of course, knew that this was going to be, you know, I hoped this was going to be a, you know, particularly amazing footage that we were potentially going to get here. And, you know, so that was the only thing that I said to him. Off we went, we filmed throughout the day. He didn't know that we were filming that interview. The solicitor didn't know that we were filming that interview. I carried on filming. And of course, this is totally explosive material. This is exactly, you know, these guys lie, bang. He did have sex with her in the car. But fraught with legal problems. We show the footage we go back, I show the footage to Brian, show the footage to Channel 4, to the lawyers. And as a team, we made a decision that if this guy was convicted, we would broadcast that material, even though he wasn't convicted for that offence. So we had to explain why he wasn't convicted for that particular offence. But, you know, Channel 4 lawyers were incredibly robust and said, if he gets convicted, we will broadcast that material. And he was subsequently, you know, convicted for 24 offences of rape, sexual activity with children, including a 13-year-old.
But if he hadn't been, then
if he hadn't been convicted of anything, we knew that we would never have been able to show it. So that was the gamble that we had to take.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you have undercover footage of misbehaviour, like we did of the classroom chaos, we had to blur the kids who were misbehaving because we couldn't get consent. And we did everything, this is really a very interesting actually problem in which Mel has read. We did everything possible to disguise the schools. We filmed in 16 schools and saw the same behaviour there, and with undercover cameras. But one of the schools where it happened, there was a badge which we hadn't completely obscured on somebody's blazer, and the Hammond High, which was in the head teacher, reported his own school, saying, "How dare this channel, you know, show?" Because I mean, actually, there was no mention of it. We took exteriors from other places to confuse people, do everything possible. But he outed himself by complaining about having been included, right? And so you know, it's quite a tough problem. I mean, the business of rights they are misbehaving, and the blobbing we hope protects them. And that's the end of the story.
And just on that consent with Eddie for a second, you went to his flat and you walked into his flat with the police, and he didn't give you consent. He didn't say, yes, that's fine.
No.
So, strictly speaking, Roger, you can explain this, you were trespassing. Or was she?
No, that's the point. I mean, if you have an explanation that is an implied question, they're with me, says the policeman. We have had on many occasions with filming in police situations where somebody says, "Get that fucking camera out of my sight," you know, and that's that. You have to do it. But he didn't do that, and therefore there's first you have the implied question, then you have the implied consent. So unless somebody asks you to leave and you don't, then you've got a defence against the charge of trespassing.
Yeah,
That's your
and
defence.
trespass itself, I mean, this is something I learned, which I thought was I didn't realise. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Not true. Can't prosecute trespassers because you're not a trespasser until you refuse to leave when asked.
That's right.
So you can go onto private property and you can film. There are other issues in terms of privacy that you might have to get around, but you can do that. You are only trespassing at the point at which you refuse to stop filming or refuse to leave when asked.
Now,
say again?
No,
because
they can be charged with trespassing unless they have reason to believe a crime is being committed. That's their trump card. They can go anywhere.
No, we're not, strictly speaking, we're not under the umbrella. So if Eddie had said to Anna and Matt, "I want you to get out my flat," they would be legally obliged to leave his flat and film from the doorway. He didn't say that, you know, he didn't know his rights well enough.
Now can we show the rape film clip? Because I want to talk about filming with police anyway, because so many people do it. How many people have ever seen the rape film from the police series? Again, sort of handful. This is a film in which, when we had access to Thames Valley Police, we knew that rape, we had agreed a list of subjects. Rape was fantastically controversial at that point because women were saying the police mistreat the victims who come, and the police denied it completely. And we had 6 attempts at filming different rape interviews, and this was the 6th. It was in the last week before our filming of 9 months of filming was over, and it was amazing. But that guy who's in the picture now had been in another film, and we've been trying to keep him out of any filming because he was such a show-off. We thought it'd be blamed on us, which in the end it was ultimately his performance, if you like. But here, a woman came in saying she'd been raped by 3 men. She didn't want to be on camera, but she didn't mind being filmed. So we filmed from behind her head, which meant that in filmmaking terms, we see what she saw. The cops, as it were, browbeating her, are doing it right down the barrel of the lens to us. And I think that was a tremendous gift, rather than I keep cutting away to her face. You are, as it were, being interviewed. So here's just a bit of it. They don't, because she isn't bleeding, because she wasn't, kind of upset in the way they expected, they didn't believe her.
If you want to make a complaint, make it. If you don't, say so. We'll take a statement off you, and that'll be the end of it. It's entirely up to you. What's it going to be?
I don't want to go to court and go through that.
Are you sure? I don't want to put any pressure on you whatsoever.
You can still take it to the doctor and that and prove it if you want to.
No, we won't, see. This is what said. If you make a complaint of rape, then we will carry on with our interview to satisfy ourselves that it's happened. Once we're satisfied, then we'll get a doctor in to examine you. All right? If you're not going to make a complaint...
Why don't you get a doctor in straight away?
She's
We're
right.
not satisfied with that it's happened. All right? That's why we're talking to you. We do not.
What if someone doesn't want to make a complaint, but you believe there is a rape?
You can't do anything about it, because if you aren't going to complain, then, as far as I'm concerned, we've got no offence.
Because you can't have an offender for an offence that doesn't exist. Much to our annoyance, believe me, it has happened.
Are you prepared to make a statement? And if we apprehend the offenders, are you willing to go to court and give evidence?
Well, if you get all 3 of them, yeah.
If we catch one of them, 2 of them or 3 of them.
No, you catch one of the other 2 are going to get you, mate.
Are you willing to have it? Are you willing to make a statement and attend court and give evidence? That's what it boils down to.
Before judge and jury.
I don't want to go to court.
Are you sure? Yeah. Then that is your decision. We'll take a statement off you. I'll go and see my inspector now, tell him what's happening. And then we'll take a statement off you, and you're quite free to leave the police station. All right?
I don't want to end up in the river, that's all.
Oh, come on. This is Reading 1980. It's not bloody Starsky and Hutch. You end up in the river. What's the matter with you?
Honestly. They haven't met some of the people I know. See what people mean by, you know, it's easier to not say anything than go through this lark. For sure. You know what I mean?
Now, she's talking to the sound man. And one of the things that happened during that was that we were asked to leave by the police. The police stopped in the middle of this and said, do you want them filming? And she said, no. So we were asked to leave. Then they went out for a cigarette or something. And I went back in and saying, look, she's also slightly mentally handicapped. She'd been to a mental hospital, which and so on, and they don't understand any of this. She said, I've just lose my memory. And they said, well, when did that happen? You know, it's a sort of terrible joke. I mean, but they, you know, it wasn't a great performance by the police. But I went back in terms of intervention and said to her, look, are you sure you want us out? Would you like us back in? Because I think the police might behave better if they know they're being filmed. So she invited us back in. So that was an intervention. Yeah. But that film we filmed for an hour and a quarter. We showed 45 minutes of it. So that's almost real time. There is no commentary, no music, no titles, nothing. No end titles about what happened. And that film influenced police handling of rape victims. It was asked, questions were asked in Parliament by Mrs. Thatcher. It was on the CBS News, not only on the BBC News. And it's the one study by somebody said that it was the most influential film changing policy that's ever been made. And it's incredibly simple. And you never see the woman at all. So in terms of ethical kind of ingredients, if you like, what you need is access, trust, and we showed this to all the coppers, by the way, and they said, oh yeah, of course that's just what it's like. You know, she would have been a terrible witness, we did everything right. But when the shit hit the fan, if you'll forgive the expression, and there was an arena special about our series, the Chief Superintendent of Reading said, well, if only I'd seen it, I would have stopped it. Which, by the way, we did show it to him, and we showed it to all the coppers, and they said it's fine. But once they had the flack, they suddenly disowned it, and publicly disowned it, quietly changed their practice. And it's one of the strange things. I kept saying to them, look, it's to your credit. This is the hardest kind of stuff to deal with. They were only doing what they were trained to do, which is give witnesses a hard time in case they fail in court. Okay, so there's a rationale, but they wouldn't, you know, we had to try and protect them against their own, you know, inability to see what was going on while telling the truth about it. And that seems to me a kind of upsum of our position. We are allowed in on some pretty awkward situations sometimes. We have to record them honestly, but also protect the people who've let us in, you know, in such a way that it wasn't going to damage their lives. And as we could talk about the films we've dropped, because, you know, the people pulled out at the very last minute, finished
a whole
films,
film.
A whole film in that
You've
series.
dropped an entire
We dropped
film.
an entire film in that series because of the parents of a young black kid who was accused of stealing a bicycle, insisted he'd found it, and they let him go. When it was in the Radio Times a week before it was going, we rang them up and said, look, we should tell you it's going to be on television in a week. They said, well, we've changed our minds. They had been filmed in that interview. And they said, no, he's gone to a new school, he'd be shamed. I'm working in a canteen in a post office, it would be shame, I can't do it. And we went back to the BBC and said, look, you know, it's only television. This is their lives. And it's probably true, that boy in a new school, age 13, it's a terrible thing to change schools anyway, and he's at the bottom of the heap. He would certainly have been bullied. And so the BBC, to their great credit, and we pulled it. And it was a very good film, and Thames Valley was furious, because they showed black, you know, young black recruits doing all right. But that we've done that, you know, and we've had people pull out. And I want to say just something, because Charlotte's just arrived. Charlotte Moore, who was head of documentaries during the whole making of Great Ormond Street, it makes a huge difference to go along with the commissioning editors with your ethical problems. Do not keep them to yourself. And if you've got somebody as understanding as Charlotte, who's been there before making films about children with cancer and so on, you know, you will get the help you need. But do not try and answer this without them, because if you come back with a hole in your film, as we had to do when we lost a huge amount of filming we did with Conjoined Twins, and another one too, you need the support of the commissioning editor, and we were lucky and privileged enough to have that. And we did with Richard Klein as well. But it's, you know, don't hide it. that's a mistake. Don't you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's an early filmmaker's mistake.
So in that situation, in the rape film, you intervened. You persuaded her to allow you to filming, believing that would modify the police's behaviour. So it was fairly faithful, but you did intervene.
They were behaving quite badly enough, right down the back. When people say, did they know they were being filmed? It was a small room, and they were looking straight at the camera.
I want to show another clip, which again, and then I want to ask the audience about the degree of intervention. If we can show the Dying for Drugs clip, which is clip number 6. Ooh, does it say 6? No, 10, sorry. Misread the writing. Clip number 10 from Dying for Drugs. So this is a film about... It's a film about the pharmaceutical industry, and it's about drug companies. That's okay. So this little boy has called Hyro has AIDS, and drugs which Indian generic companies produce for less than a cent per tablet and sell for about 3 cents per tablet at a fairly large profit, are sold by the big pharma company who owns the copyright in Honduras, in this country, for $25 per tablet, because they can. And as a result of that pricing structure, this little boy is not very well. Let's play the clip. If Hyro's family had been able to buy generic AIDS drugs at Indian prices, he would never have needed diflucan, because he wouldn't have succumbed to the infection in his throat. It's not only Pfizer that has played a part in his illness, but every big pharma company that has AIDS drugs but refuses to sell them at affordable prices. In that situation, there are a number of ethical questions around that. First of all, there's the question of intervention. So we had pretty heavily intervened by then. We'd called a doctor who we were paying for because the family couldn't afford it. The vehicle we were taking him to hospital in was our car. My fixer was driving it. I was sitting in the back filming, exploiting the situation, arguably, exploiting this dying child to make a point. And the fact that it's our double cab pickup and I can film in through the back window. And then, I don't know it at the time, but I film the moment of death. I film Hyro dying. We then have to decide whether or not we're going to use it. We then have to decide whether or not to show the moment of death, as we did. You can see what we did in the end, because I've shown you the clip. But I think the moment of death is one of those difficult areas where you question whether or not you should be showing it.
Well, Charlotte, we had, there was a decision, wasn't it, never to show a dead child in the Great Ormond Street series. Did you ever show them in your series with the Dying for with the children with cancer?
We did actually.
Did you?
But I mean, it's all about we did actually. We're slightly different there because the family, it was an open coffin situation rather than when he just died. So it was what the family wanted. I don't know if we ever, I would have to correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but I don't think we actually made that decision. It was more in the storytelling. It never felt like the right thing to do.
Yes.
I mean, I was thinking about another film I did with Adam Wishart about 23-week babies. And we did actually show a mother with her baby who had died. But because the whole film was about very early births and it was absolutely taking you to that moment of decision-making about whether you let a baby die because it's so early and the consequences will be massive, or whether you allow the parents to make that decision to keep the baby alive for as long as well. And it felt like the right thing. It wasn't for too long. It wasn't
gratuitously held in some mawkish way, but it felt like for the parents that's what they were having to make that decision, and they were having to go through that moment. So to have cut short of that would have not taken you to that moment of decision making. I mean, I think in Great Ormond Street, Roger, for both series, I don't think we ever had a moment where that felt like that was part of the story we were telling, was it? If you see what I mean.
But the shot of the shot of the baby in the mother's arms is very clearly not Brian, because Brian is Indian after he dies. But so we have the clip, Brian has died. Then Victor comes and says that it helps other people. But then there's a shot through the window. Louise was asking me, it's a white baby in the white mother's arms, so you know it isn't.
I think every decision you make on that is all about in the edit, in the moment. You're taking a whole load of sort of judgment calls all along the way. And it's not always about what you film, it's about what you put in the film at the end.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. That was the last question I know that was raised about whether we didn't use things that had been offered us, as it were, because people were being too honest.
Yeah.
That was an interesting one. Have you had that?
Sorry, just say again.
No, it's just whether we have such trust with people that sometimes people, as it were, implicate themselves unwittingly in something that could damage them later. And that it seems to me is the ultimate test of our responsibility for them.
Have we got any questions from the audience? Yes.
Yeah, I just love to ask you. You started off right.
Can you just wait for the mic to get to you? Yeah.
You started by saying never do anything or ask people to do something you wouldn't do yourselves. And I was just wondering if any of you had the experience of turning the camera on yourselves or on family or friends that might be going through some difficult times, and you thought, I'm going to step in here, I'm going to make a film, and how those ethical decisions were so different. And if you haven't ever done it, what would stop you from doing it? Because I suppose it's just, sometimes I find a lot of filmmaking is about the other, and I do a lot of work on autobiographical filmmaking, so I'm just curious about if that has ever come up for you or how you would deal with it if it did. Thank you.
Well, I mean, my first wife was killed in a car crash, and somebody did film the funeral, but I never filmed her in the hospital, and I didn't have a mobile phone. It was 35 years ago, whatever. But so I remember the film of the funeral, but I've never seen it. I was given a DVD of it, or video of it, but I've never seen it. I never wanted to go back there, but I was glad in some senses that it was filmed, and my children can see it if they ever want to, and so on. But I've never been in exactly the same situation. It's a very good question. I'm completely disarmed by it, I have to say.
Anna?
I've had a couple of situations actually where so I grew up in a place called Dunblane, and the very first film that I was ever involved in was a film for ITV that we made about the massacre in Dunblane, and I was again quite a young researcher at that point, and I knew some of the people who had been involved, and so that I guess that's the closest I've ever got, and it was the very first film that we ever made. Wow. It won lots of awards, but it was really about telling that story of the friendship of the parents who had lost the children. But it was really personal for me because my cousin had, she was a nursery teacher, and she had looked after one of the little girls who died because that little girl had lost her mother to cancer, and her father had asked my cousin to really, become, sort of a surrogate mum after school. So it was hugely personal for me, and, so essential that we got that right, in terms of the balance of, storytelling, but, really important for me that we told that story well, not just obviously because you need to tell that story well as a filmmaker, but personally, my cousin was deeply, deeply affected by what had happened, and I wanted to honour her because she had, really opened the access into that group of families. So that was the closest that I've ever got to that situation. I then went on, I made a series actually at my old college in Oxford, which was again access that was a personal access to me. So I've kind of, I've been able to, again, walk that tightrope between, that was very important that we got that right, but that wasn't obviously quite as intimate and quite as personal as the Dunblane scenario.
There's a question.
Probably have time for one more question, I think, before they'll...
One more? Okay. You put your hand up.
Let's make it 2.
Okay. Question here?
There's a woman in the back who had her hand up. Let's do 2.
Let's take 2, yeah. What the hell?
Sorry. My question's about informed consent.
can you really give fully informed consent if you yourself as filmmakers aren't fully aware of the consequences of someone appearing in the film? I may be wrong, but I think the rape victim, she was actually the News of the World or the Sun revealed her identity, and that was obviously a consequence that you wouldn't have foreseen, so it wouldn't have.
I didn't quite catch.
I think the question is can someone give fully informed consent, and can we be sure it's fully informed consent if we can't predict outcomes, such as, for example, the press revealing the identity of the rape victim?
Well, it's a very interesting question, that, actually, because the people did do exactly that, but we hadn't, and she was paid £5,000 and said in the film that she didn't know she was being filmed. So they paid her £5,000 to reveal her identity, and we had done everything possible to protect it, but in the end it was her choice. And we offered her the chance to see the film. We offered her mother the chance to see the film. They both turned it down, and then sold their story to the people. But for $5,000, I guess they felt that was okay. I mean, it's a very good question. The last. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say there's another sort of flip side of that I've had before, where I agreed to keep some mothers anonymous when I made Edge of the City. I absolutely categorically said, we will not reveal your identity. I didn't do any profile shots. You know, we were watertight, and of course I showed them the film. But then, when the film transmitted, one of the mothers said, I was in that film. Yeah. You know, so it was really interesting, you know, a few months later, oh yes, I was in, you know, so she wanted to then reveal her identity. Yeah, and, you know, and that's interesting about,
very, you know... Very briefly, see the film Not Criminally Responsible, which I saw yesterday, about two mental patients who had attacked people, and a woman who didn't want her face shown at all during the film, because of the film, has had her picture taken in the Canadian press. It's a wonderful film, very beautifully made, and the same thing came out. Sorry, we have the last question there.
Okay, my question is about what responsibility do you feel that filmmakers have for a long-term or aftercare relationship with their subjects, especially for the more vulnerable ones? Obviously, it's not always practical internationally with international topics.
Well, yeah, you say that. I mean, I can see Louise mouthing Ntombi at me because a clip that we didn't get to was a little girl called Ntombi who was 11 years old, who talked about being raped 8 days earlier, and who... That was a very interesting situation in terms of, you know, we could not show that if she was British. It would simply be against the law because you can't identify a child as in a sex case. So because she was in South Africa, we could. Now, our long-term aftercare for her, even though she's in South Africa, we're still in touch with people in that town, and they check up on her. As a result of the film, viewers wanted to help her, and we were able to, with Channel 4's help, we were able to fund counselling for her, post-traumatic stress counselling, and that's certainly something we've had in the past. Another film, a film that Charlotte commissioned about, which had children talking about the effect of homelessness, that ended up with us being able to give them some help afterwards, some counselling. So you do have a responsibility, absolutely, and that, I think, personally, and I know these two would completely agree, is as long as necessary. What happened with Ntombi, and the reason Louise was mouthing her name, was because completely unforeseen consequence. Although the family were very keen on the film going out, she really wanted the film to be shown. She was very clear that she was not allowed to speak about this. She was blamed. She wanted to have the opportunity to have her story told, and she wanted to be given a voice. However, 2 years after the film was shown, it was still on our website and the Channel 4 website, and Bayer, the pharmaceutical company, had a leaflet produced that was about depot dose contraceptives, and this leaflet had Ntombi's picture on it, and this leaflet was distributed in her school, and she brought it home in tears because she'd obviously been bullied at school. Her mother was horrified, and the next time our fixer, who's still living in Port Elizabeth, was in touch with the family a few months later, the mother said, "This is terrible, why did you do this?" And you know, fixer faxed us scanned in the leaflet and showed it to us, and we were horrified. And with Channel 4's help, we immediately contacted Bayer in South Africa, who were initially very defensive and sent us lawyers' letters. And eventually we got to Bayer in Germany and to the chief executive of Bayer in Germany saying, this is an outrageous exploitation of this little girl and you need to do something about it. And that once they realised that they were dealing with Channel 4 in the UK and not just some little girl in a township that didn't matter, that they could, you know, use, they then became a little more responsive and did say, oh, well, we'll try and help. And they have been to visit her and personally apologised to her and her mother. We're still, they've said that they'll put her into a better school, but they still haven't. That's been about a year now. We've been battling with them over that. So we're still trying to get that done. So that's, I know why Louise was mouthing Louise.
One last thought, and we have to stop, but the one last thought I want to give you is that I think it's an Arab view, North African view, that if you take someone's picture, you've captured their soul. And I think so too. I think that is our responsibility. You have to say, as long as you can, you've caught something that is real in our style of filming. Not in the others when people are, you know, it's much more manipulated. But when you've done your best to kind of reflect somebody's life at a crucial point in their life, then you have a responsibility you absolutely cannot walk away from. And I think that's what's allowed us, because we keep getting access to other places, because people have recognized that's what we do. And I take my hat off to Brian and Anna as well. Their films are wonderful, but they're respectful. The common thing that runs through all our films like Rock is respect for the characters. And I hope that's what you can do, take away from this session.
And on that note, thank you very much to our panel, Roger Graef and Anna Hall.